Well, good afternoon, good morning. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of OTA on the Air. My name is Irwin Shires. I'm Vice President of Education and Engagement for the Ohio Trucking Association, and very happy to have as our guest today, Carl Scharf, who is a shareholder in the Tax Services Division of Schneider Downs and Associates, one of a longtime OTA supporter and a sponsoring member. And Carl, we're very happy to have you with us today.
Thank you.
No, this is a busy time of the year in the tax and accounting world, so we really appreciate you taking some time out to talk about a couple of key areas that you have helped us with over the course of the past year and in previous years. Obviously, the pandemic has disrupted so many aspects of our lives and made pivots and changes off of what has been the norm, and I know the accounting world is no different. Tell us a little bit, if you can, just a little bit about Schneider Downs. You know, how long have you guys been in business? And what areas of the trucking industry do your clients come from within our world?
Great. Yeah, perfect. Thanks, everyone. Hey, as you mentioned, good morning or perhaps good afternoon, depending on when you're watching this video. But yes, just a brief commercial. I know we've been a long time sponsor and partner of the Ohio Trucking Association, so I'm sure there's probably a handful that are familiar with us. But for those that are not, Schneider Downs is not a racetrack. Sometimes we're often confused with Schneider Downs. Every once in a while, we'll get a phone call into the front desk. But Schneider Downs is a public accounting firm founded in 1965. We're a top 60 advisory and accounting firm here in the U.S. with offices in Columbus, Pittsburgh, and Washington, D.C. We roughly have 500 personnel, 52 shareholders, between the three offices, and are locally owned and managed, which is something we're really proud of with our strong history. With respect to your question on where our clients come from within the industry, we're pretty diversified when it comes to the transportation space, but we have a 65 plus year track history of probably, I'd say, serving probably half of it is probably in the trucking, from kind of the local carriers to national enterprises, trucking and hauling space, and then the other 50% probably made up of kind of the freight brokerage, 3PL, and warehousing clients. So, a good question.
Yep. Yeah, and it's amazing, isn't it, the different types of services that the carriers and the brokerage services need over the course of a year or over the course of many years, because they touch so many different aspects of the industry. Right.
No doubt. Yeah, they all have their definitely unique niches from the perspective of, when you get into trucking and hauling, you have a lot of people issues and driver shortage. When you get into warehousing and freight brokerage, it's a little bit different. Freight brokerage is probably more aligned like professional services, and the warehousing space, while they have their challenges, they're a little bit more technology driven in the warehousing space. So yeah,
that kind of leads into the main crux of what we wanted to talk about today. A couple of years back, you guys approached us with the idea of putting together an annual membership survey, with the idea of having all of these different areas of the industry represented in a comprehensive sort of economic review of what areas of the business they were focused on, what other areas of business they were doing well at, and what areas did they need improvement with. And it helped us, I guess, identify some issues, didn't it, as it came? Well, how did that come about originally?
Yeah, so good question. Yeah, so how did we come up with the survey originally? Probably a couple years ago, 3 years ago, I'd say. It came up through a brainstorming, project between a handful of us of how to drive value to your membership. And the industry was being faced with a lot of challenges, driver shortage being the top one. But I think through our partnership and relationship of providing webinars and being an expert in the industry amongst our region, we thought that a survey might be something that the members hopefully would find valuable to understand how their peers are maybe dealing with challenges, and hopefully gain some insight, into their markets.
Right, and I was fortunate. It was one of the very first meetings that I was involved in when I started OTA beginning of last year. Was at your office talking about this, and it really was fun to sort of start brainstorming some ideas, and having come out of a very niche focused area within the trucking world in a corporate situation. It was kind of eye-opening for me, just because I was aware of certain situations, but not to the extent of how dire the problems were within the areas of driver shortages and and some of the ancillary problems within finance and accounting, because I hadn't had direct exposure to any of that. So it was fun to take part. It really was a good, the first couple of years we really had a nice response to it. But COVID, of course, just threw a big monkey wrench into all of the normal plans that we had, and it became a casualty, I guess, of last year. Would say what was, it was the main reason. But when we talk about what other factors came into the decision to sort of, from your standpoint, to sort of pivot away from a formal survey that a lot of folks didn't seem to have time or energy to commit to this year, into what you did come up with, which is this really fascinating series of white papers.
Yeah. So I think, over the past 2 years, I think there's probably a little bit of survey fatigue or competing priorities as people manage and deal with the pandemic, as you alluded to. So just because, survey responses were a little bit lighter than years past, was the reason to pivot perhaps from this year. Now, it'd be, the goal is to get back, to relaunch the survey again for this upcoming year, assuming, hopefully, the members find it valuable, which we thought they did. And the thought would be, how can we continue to have comparable data over a period of time? So I think going actually back to kind of what we just previously discussed on how we collaborated to come up with the survey, I think one important point that I wanted to circle back to is that, when we go through and try to compile these questions and we work together to come up with the questions, we want to have some consistency with the questions, so we have comparable data that then we could provide to the membership group that they can look at and analyze in a quick amount of time and find valuable. But also we want to make sure we're asking pointed questions that people want to know about from their peers within the state of Ohio. So, I think from that perspective, if there's something that I think members or you all want to hear from, feel free to bring that question up to Irwin or myself, and we could figure out a way to maybe incorporate a question into the survey. So
that's a great point. And I know in our discussions with it, and when we've had discussions with with the rest of OTA and the Schneider Downs staff, as we put these together, we're always thinking of topics, right, that we think would resonate with the membership, and saying, hey, this is an important subject. We really want to know, and it's really the crux of it. We want to know what you think about these, and it helps us steer ourselves in a direction toward being able to obviously maximize the assistance for the membership. But to your point about consistency, we look at, because of the way that I know the survey had been structured, we it was easy for members to opt out of certain questions while answering others. And I think what we were looking at, some of the response numbers for certain questions made it easy just for say, well, maybe we should leave that one out. But when that happens, right, we don't get that sort of trending data that you guys rely on so much to be able to show, what areas really need to be emphasized and what areas seem to be doing okay versus not okay, right? Is that an accurate?
That's it. That's very accurate. Yeah.
So let's talk about these papers. That was the idea that you published to say, okay, well, here's data we do have already from other sources or from our own internal sources through other means, right? And you said, let's put together a series of papers that, again, we could get out to the membership, that they could take a look at on their own time, and at least they'll have an understanding of, where your company looks at, data through this year, and look at it from the prism of, has COVID affected it and how, and does it make situation worse? Could it possibly make it better? And most importantly, as we hopefully eventually start to extract ourselves from COVID, what do we need to attack first to getting ourselves anywhere back to some semblance of normalcy? And it was very obvious from the outset that the first thing you guys were going to attack was the driver shortage situation. And this was obviously the first paper that came out, and we were fortunate enough that you guys had that ready, and we passed it out during our annual conference in September. But copies of this are still available. They're up on the website. So if there's any members out there that have not seen this, I encourage you to get a hold of a copy. You can email myself, Irwin at ohiotrucking.org, and I'll make sure you get a copy right away. But talk a little bit, Carl, if we could, about about obviously the reasoning behind choosing the driver shortage situation to start off. But did you discover anything revealing or unexpected during your research on the driver shortage problem? Everybody's trying to pinpoint one thing, and I don't know if it really is one thing, but did something pop up that you weren't expecting during that research?
Yeah, so I think obviously, well, maybe to answer the first question, why we chose that topic was because it was the number one issue, in previous surveys and continues to be the biggest issue facing the industry. When you read the white paper, I don't think there's anything probably that's going to come as a shock or a surprise, probably, to the industry. However, I do hope and think that there's a lot of retention suggestions and perhaps strategies, whether it's tax savings, that could hopefully provoke some creative juices within organizations about, hey, how can we be creative about retaining our most important asset? Whether that's, construction companies reassess their per diem programs and get creative there. Can we offer better insurance? Things that I'm sure maybe have been kicked around, but perhaps there are creative ways and things that we've done and worked with some of our clients on how to perhaps come up with ways to perhaps better comp drivers, whether it's through per diem programs or insurance benefits or 401k incentives and using automatic enrollment to help retain our most important asset. So.
Yeah, it's funny when you we always talk about the obvious solution is money, right? You throw money at a problem and that tends to solve it. But what we've seen, and I think it was kind of borne out with some of what you discussed in this, is the fact that just adding additional cash to the coffers isn't really doing the job because everyone's trying to do the same thing.
Yeah.
So it really is an attempt for, to tell carriers to pivot off of just paying them more to do the job that they are doing, and incentivize some of the other areas that they have a responsibility for, or at least touch, to make them feel more relevant to the company, so that they're not just a number on the side of the truck or a phone number that rings in, at a busy time because there's an issue at a shipper or delivery point. When they feel like they're part of the actual process of making the company better, making the company more profitable, they tend to develop better loyalty that way, I would think. And I think that was covered. One of the main ones I saw was making sure they get home more often, and improving the communication. And I know from my time as a driver way back when, that even then communication is so important. Making sure the drivers have accurate information, which would seem to be a no-brainer, but again, can sometimes be a challenge.
Yeah, no doubt on the communication aspect. I mean, that's the foundation of all good relationships with employer, employee. Every day with my, at home with my spouse, right? Relationships and communication between the two,
yeah, it makes for happy home, makes for happy work environment. So definitely, to me, that was the most revealing part of this white paper, was the idea that there are solutions that don't necessarily just involve money, that can help, and things that should, from a common sense standpoint, should be in place already. And it sometimes, real life tends to intervene, and everybody's human, and everybody has emotional, there's a lot of emotional stress going on right now. That's no great secret. But to be able to minimize it and again, make the drivers feel that they're not just relevant, but important and vital to the industry and to their company, will go a long way toward, keeping the drivers you have. Because you're right, the real key, the more you keep, the fewer you have to replace and add and dip into the shortage well, which we know is only getting deeper right now. So let's move on to the next one you came out in this. So that was the September one. In October, you came out with one which was very interesting, because again, an area that I did not have a lot of exposure to in my 32 years in the industry, but lease accounting, and specifically the changes that are going to be coming up next year regarding the lease accounting. Can you give just a quick summary of what those involve and why it's so important for carriers that are leasing trailers, especially?
Yeah, absolutely. And the lease accounting white paper was less about business operations, certainly, and more about financial reporting requirements that's required for the banking institutions, for those trucking companies that perhaps have a financial statement review requirement. or an audit requirement. So it's probably geared more towards CFOs, controllers, and accounting managers, those kind of dealing with the financial reporting aspect. But the biggest change and impact, really, it's going to be beginning here in 2022 for privately held companies that have some sort of assurance on their financial reporting. But beginning in 2022, trucking companies will have to report the net present value of future lease obligations and liabilities. So trucks probably being some of the biggest leases. But you're going to have to carry those on their balance sheet, on their financial statement. So banks want to know, hey, how long are you locked into these leases, and what's that future liability? Does that impact how much we lend you? So I think that's going to be the biggest. It's more of an administrative, but the users of the financial statements, in this case, probably the banking institutions, are going to be the ones relying on that information. Publicly traded companies already had adopted. So those large national enterprises that perhaps are publicly traded, they've already had to deal with this.
Sure, but for the smaller ones that are looking to expand, right? That was, I think, a key. Now, just one follow-up thought on that, and again, not my area of expertise, but for a carrier that may be looking to try to add trailers to the fleet, not that they can do so right now anyway, because there's none to be had from what I've heard, because they're having the same problem with trailers as they are with power units, right? Getting the components to finish them. But for those that might have an opportunity to get a hold of trailers, obviously it sounds like there is definitely a benefit to getting them acquired before the end of the year rather than waiting until after the first. Is that correct?
Sure. Yeah. And depending on how it's structured, yes, that's right. Absolutely. And I think those that want to get their hands, do need them, probably should try to get their hands on them as soon as possible.
Sure.
But
so fleet managers, and as well as, like I say, anyone in the accounting departments of the carriers. Again, if you'd like to get access to that, again, it's up on the member side of the OTA website. But if you want a copy, just email me, Irwin at ohiotrucking.org, and I'll make sure to get a copy as quickly as you can. So the most recent one, then, again, that just came out regarding the economic impact, and
November.
This has been such a mixed bag of information. It's really been tough to keep track of it because some of the people have just literally been going gangbusters. They never even heard of an economic slowdown even last year because they were so well positioned to pivot to delivering essential supplies, or then pivoting to deliver the vaccines. And they just haven't skipped a beat in terms of that. Then there are others who are more tied to the current supply chain issues that are really struggling between that and getting and having enough of a fleet to be able to do the job properly. So again, did you find that a lot that it was really tied to how wide the pendulum is swinging on discrepancies right now?
Yeah, I think so to that point, depending on the customer of the trucking company, has dictated kind of the economic performance of the trucking company. I think fortunately what we've seen is, many of our clients have been fortunate, and it's been a really, like you said, gangbusters year. And that's really tied to, manufacturing, construction industries, as you say, medical field, perhaps wholesale and retail. So depending on how those industries have done, in a couple of them have been better than others. Construction and wholesale continue to be really strong. I think manufacturing and retail probably have been a little bit flatter and have remained steady. But I think depending on what industry the trucking company is serving, I think is what we're seeing as far as how the performance of the trucking company has been. So.
Sure. And I guess it's safe to assume that going forward, there's going to be that discrepancy is going to continue until all the supply chain issues kind of normalize. And as I've been telling people, it's however long it took you to get into that bad a shape, it's probably going to take you that long to climb back out of it because especially from the manufacturing standpoint, right? They can't just make up the lost amount of product while they're still building out new product. I mean, that is a long drawn out process to just increase their productivity and then maintain it until they truly are caught up, which means the backlog's filled and all the orders that have come in since the backlog are also filled.
So I think the jury's still out too on how the holiday season is going to impact that, right? The holiday season's going on, I'm sure everyone's perhaps most people have bought something and probably received an email about supply chain issues and a delay, maybe perhaps in your order, or hey, if we don't have your order in here by December 5th, we're not going to be able to guarantee a delivery by December 25th. I'd be curious. I think the jury's still out how that's going to impact the trucking companies. That may delay some revenues for some of them. So
yeah, I would think, it's funny because my wife and I were out, visited a couple stores last night, and it looked like, January 3rd already.
yeah,
In terms of some of the typical Christmas season type products and some of the some of the things you would consider given as gifts, those shelves are just picked clean. It's
yeah,
remarkable already. And I'm sure some of those early Black Friday specials had something to do with it. The fact that so many people are just ordering stuff online because it's easier.
yeah,
It really just it feels weird out there right now. And again, not something we're going to even know how this season affected it for another few weeks. So let's pivot out and start looking ahead a little bit if we can. So first of all, which topics are the remaining white papers you have coming up? Do we have to look forward to?
Yep. So we actually pivoted from the original schedule. Originally I think we were supposed to have data analytics here on the table here for December, but we're actually going to do an update on the infrastructure bill, which I think has been positive news for the industry. Everyone's happy about. So that's going to be coming out here probably here in the next week with the publishing. And then in January, we have the tax update on what's going on. Certainly that's my background, being a tax advisory shareholder in the transportation group. There's a lot of good news there on the most recent House version of the Build Back Better Act that was signed. So lots of positives, I think, than what was originally touted in the Green Book put out back in May by our president. So I think positives there for the trucking industry, and there'll be more to come in January. And then in February, the topic's going to be cybersecurity and technology.
And we keep seeing examples of that, almost on a weekly basis now. What large system was hacked.
Yeah.
And we're starting to see some of the crypto sites get hacked, and and that's a whole nother layer. But just even the regular, simple sites that we expect to be, as secure as possible, and they're getting hacked, and all that information is just getting leaked out there.
Yeah, it's a big problem. I mean, we continue to see it. It doesn't matter how big you are either, right? So I mean, you could be a small carrier, or you could be a large carrier, and the hackers don't care. If they have access to your network or access to somebody's email inbox, and they're able to monitor, what we're seeing is hackers will get in, will monitor an email Outlook address of an owner or CFO or somebody. You have no clue they're there monitoring it. They see what's coming in, what's coming out. All of a sudden, they send you a fake invoice to pay. You send it to your accounts payable group to pay, and before you know it, the money's gone and wired somewhere that you thought was a vendor that really wasn't a vendor. So we're seeing a lot of that. Unfortunately, the pandemic has even only continued to accelerate hackers, right? I think people being out of work, lots of creative people. Just how can we maybe harness these hackers' creativity into a more positive way than
now that
taking out companies. So.
Yeah, now that they know how to do it, let's hire them in to show us how to prevent it from being done. Right, at the old catch me if you can plot. And you're right. And I know from presentations we'd had over the past year and a half that part of the reason it was exacerbated is because everybody was home and working from home. The cybersecurity that's in place in your house is nowhere near what it will be at your office building, large or small. And I think for the people that weren't aware of that right away or didn't make the necessary adjustments, they made themselves very vulnerable to that. And that there seems to be no sign of that abating, because like you said, with everybody, you're on one side or the other, you're working as hard as you can to access these systems, and you've got somebody working just as hard on the other side to prevent it from happening by in some cases by doing those sort of fake phishing and seeing how many of their employees they catch. My wife, her company deals with that on a regular basis, and I know for a fact she has a supervisor that sends emails out. Hey, don't open this email. It was from a, and the IT people have to call and give her grief because like you're defeating the purpose of this whole thing. So we know it's a good topic. So again, yeah, we'll look forward to seeing that information. And again, we remind the members that those come out in our membership minute, usually the middle of the month membership minute. Remember, those come out on Mondays every other week. And we will continue to include these as attachments in those membership minutes, along with these interviews as we get them out there to you. So, Carl, let's wind it up with this little brief list. You know, we had talked a little bit before about, you know, we really want to bring back the member survey coming up in 2022. If you could just remind everybody again why it is so important for us to hear from them and again emphasizing that the information they provide is, you know, is secure and contained. I know a lot of carriers are always concerned about giving away something close to what they call proprietary information, and that's not what this is.
Yeah, yeah. Again, you know, we're excited about bringing the survey back, and really everything you enter in there is completely confidential. There's no, you know, it's all the questions are, you know, meant to be painless. We try to keep the survey down to a concise 20 to 25 questions, no more, no less, just because we want to make sure we build out consistent data that's valuable for the members. At the same time, we want to make sure we don't want you sharing any trade secrets. So that's not the objective. The objective, though, is hopefully you can learn something from your peers. You can learn kind of where you fall. I think we're all curious on where we fall, no matter what it is. So again, we hope it's valuable. I guess the other reminder is just, hey, if there's something you want to see in it, you know, send a message over to Irwin or myself. So we could try to build that in.
Yep. Yeah, and that's great, Carl, because you're right. You know, we work best as an association as representing our membership when we know what our members are most concerned about right now, what items are causing. And again, you know, we don't have to guess too hard to figure out some of the, you know, the top 3 or 5. But
Yep.
Within those, there are always subcategories that are specific to maybe a niche group or members that are of certain size.
Mm-hmm.
And we want to know what those are as well, so that again we can help target those people to possible solutions as we figure them out.
Yep.
And speaking of figuring solutions, I'll leave you with this one, Carl, because again, over the last 2 years, we've seen so many changes in so many normal areas that we usually didn't have to give too much thought to, right? It was kind of,
Mm-hmm.
there were so many things you could do kind of on an autopilot fashion, and I got to do this form, and yeah, there was last year's numbers and these numbers are 2% different, so we just make adjustment, send it in, and that's it. And it ain't like that no more. Right? I mean, radical changes have happened and from your standpoint, again, from the accounting, the tax situations, that, you know, again, favorable, great, always great news, but definitely different. What do you see as the biggest issue facing the industry from an economic standpoint as we head into 2022?
Yeah, and it'd be good to, we could wrap it up here. But on this note, I mean, there's been so much change over the last 2 years between the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that came out from tax reform legislation that was implemented in 2018 to all the COVID relief, between PPP, employee retention credit, other incentives, and then now like dealing with, you know, some of the lease accounting standards that trucking companies now have to deal with here heading into 2022. But then just general planning, you know, general planning at year end is always so key and important. I mean, you know, maximizing credits and incentives here before the end of the year, you know, for the trucking industry, alternative fuel credits, they've been around for a long time. Are you as an organization maximizing those alternative fuel tax credits on your tax return? So looking at, you know, perhaps you have reefer trucks, you know, are there refund opportunities perhaps that, you know, you're burning up a lot of fuel waiting at docks, you know, to keep the goods cool. So, I mean, I think there's a lot of stuff, and then, you know, bonus depreciation that's set to scale back, stuff from tax rules and regulations we become accustomed to over time. A lot of that stuff scaling back, beginning in 2022. And then, you know, for those perhaps larger enterprises that have international operations or hauling across lines, there's a lot of international tax reform that's in the current House proposed bill that you probably want to plan for, so you don't have a big surprise come April. You know, I know it's not operations, it's not necessarily driving top line dollars, but hopefully, you those in the organization that are dedicated and looking over these things, because you don't want to be surprised with a big either cash event for taxes or a big administrative burden that you have to deal with come April and catch you by surprise. And what are the things that we could be doing right now to either prepare us for that event, or perhaps from a timing perspective, maybe minimize some of that exposure. So
yeah, great advice across the board, because you're right. Exposure to any sort of financial non-windfall, I guess you'd say, right? It's
right.
all about preventing negative cash flow, right? So
Yeah.
I learned that term in the safety compliance world. The less you pay in fines and attorney's fees to defend yourself in court, that's more money you get to keep and invest in the company. And that certainly is the case on your end from the tax liability standpoint too. So yeah, everybody protect yourself. And if you have questions, Carl will be happy to answer them for you. Carl, let's give them your email real quick if they have.
Yeah, the best way to reach out to me if there's any follow-up questions after this is Scharf, SCHARF at SchneiderDowns.com. Schneider Downs, SCHNEIDER Downs, DOWNS.com. So I'd be happy to provide any answers to any questions that you all have about whether it's the white papers or anything else you have maybe as you head into year end. We'd be happy to talk.
Great. Carl, I want to thank you once again for taking part in today's OTA on the air. Great information start to finish. And again, we'll look forward to seeing the rest of the white papers as they come out in the next couple, 3 months. And again, we thank all of you for joining us for this edition of OTA on the air.